everyone. So we're gonna get started on time because I know a lot of you have other talks that you have to go to, so you're making a full day of it. And I'm hearing really good things about the talks that you've been to before, so I'm gonna stay around and watch a couple, although it's Sunday, so I'm usually horizontal on this day, but we'll try our best. Thanks again for taking any time to come. So let me just give you a brief overview of who I am, and then we'll just get started, and I'll give you an overview of the talk as well. So my name is Karisha George, and I am an associate lecturer at the University of York, but I've been teaching and researching in higher education for around 6 years now. I know, I'm much older than I look. Everyone thinks I'm like in my 20s, and I'm like, I let them think that for about 5 minutes, and I'm like, I'm almost 40. Yeah, I know. Everybody's like, yeah, you don't look it. I know. So essentially what my passion is about student well-being. But as I was exploring student well-being and student resilience, what I stumbled upon was that according to research, you would expect that young adults, so students, have the highest levels of resilience, the highest levels of well-being. But what the literature actually shows is that older adults have the highest levels of well-being, and it continues to increase as you get older. So I can't wait till I become like 50, 60, 70. That differs across countries. So in, for instance, Russia, so it's called like a curve like this. So lowest when you're in your young adulthood, but highest as you get older. So in Russia, the point at which they start to go back up is a little later on. But in China, the point at which they start to go back up is really, really early. So they start to go back up at like 40, 50, right? So some of those aspects are what we're going to look at today. But we're also going to look at essentially what are the key things that they have been linked to for these variations in resilience over time. Right? Don't worry if you don't know what resilience is. We'll also start off with definitions because I want you to follow me through the entire process because this is my passion area and I hope that you leave with some passion as well. One of the main things I try to do when I give a talk is also spend about 10 minutes choosing the graphics. So I do hope that you appreciate the graphics as we go through because that motivates me to put it on. We're going to be here for around an hour, but it's not going to be me talking at you for the entire time because I believe that well-being, for you to fully understand it, it should be an engaging process where you get to reflect on your own experiences as well in order to fully understand what the research is telling you. Right? So it's going to be, that's why I gave you those pen and paper, for you to actually spend time engaging in what the research is showing us is effective and is explaining the higher levels of resilience in older age. Some of it should come to you automatically because some of you guys are older, so you'll be like, I do that all the time, right? So that's some of the kind of key points that I want you guys to take away today. And if I'm ever going too quickly for you, just let me know because I don't want to lose anyone along the way. Is everybody ready to begin? Okay. So we're going to start off with what is resilience, and I'm going to go through it and explain to you the process, and I hope I don't lose any of you guys along the way there, but if I do, just let me know. And I always like to have a little slogan. So one of the slogans I've come up with to kind of support our students in resilience is the Success at York Toolkit. And that has a prop model which talks to them about having purpose in their life, having resourcefulness, having optimism, having perseverance. But when I was looking at trying to explain what is resilience for the everyday man, what I came across was SLAY. Of course, at that time I was listening to a lot of Beyonce, so that might explain that as well. But SLAY is going to be the acronym I want you guys to take away with. So when you're going through stress, you just slay. You just go in front of your mirror and you slay, right? And so SLAY for us is going to talk about savoring your successes, leaning on your values, accepting your experiences, and yearning for more. Because I didn't want to overwhelm us with too much information, we're going to focus a lot on the first three, and I'm just going to summarize the last one for you guys as we go, as we're hopefully going to be leaving at that point in time. Right? So I'm going to slow down as well if you need anything, but hopefully we're able to get at least to cover the first three stuff, right? And at least you know how to slap, even if you don't know how to slay. All right. So let's get started with resilience. So here's where I want you to start reflecting on your life. As we reflect on our lives, we tend to focus a lot on the positives, or we tend to focus a lot on the negatives. And that depends on who we are. But everyone has a range of positives and negatives that has happened to them across their lifespan. And according to resilience, both of them are important for you to develop higher levels of resilience over time. Right, so let me start off with a definition of what resilience is. Resilience is the capacity to bounce back after an experience that kind of throws you off your normal state of functioning. Well-being and resilience are very closely linked. So most of you might have an understanding of well-being as having high levels of functioning, as able to get through your day with a kind of optimistic outlook at the end of the day. But then something might happen to you that will throw you off of that. You struggle then to function, and that is completely normal. Everyone has those experiences that happen to them, and those experiences are key for us to then get back to our normal levels of well-being. But what relationship actually suggests is that we should not even be striving to get back to the levels of well-being. We should be striving to get to higher levels of well-being. And that's what resilience is. It's about a situation that knocks you over, where you have to figure yourself out, figure out what's going on, make sense of that experience, and then develop into a better person, a better functioning person. Because if you aim to just get back to your normal levels of well-being, what happens is if a similar event comes, you then get knocked off your kilter again. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to resilience. Being able to develop into a more psychologically better functioning person, psychologically, socially, and all the other areas that we can think about. Right, so to start off, to get you to understand that process of resilience, we're going to look and think about our hills and our valleys. Right? I don't know if anybody listens to reggae music, but there's a song that goes, hills and valleys too. And that's where I got this from. Right? I couldn't find the proper picture, so the graphic is not as reggae-ish as I would want it to be, but I want us to think about it in that way. So think about hills that you've experienced in your life. Some of us have achieved a long-term goal. Some of us are still trying to achieve a long-term goal. It could be a lifetime that takes us to get there. So for students, it will be something like getting into university. For not people my age anymore, because houses are too expensive, but for people a bit older, it could be buying a house. It could be getting a dream job. But it could also be personally. So it could be something about developing a skill. So learning how to socialize in this new world where everyone has a phone and social media is key to make friendships. And I don't like social media. Or learning how to think critically about something, right? Even if it's critically about yourself. Gaining recognition. So for students, it could be getting a degree. But for the rest of us, it could be winning a contest. For the really lucky of us, it could be winning the lottery, right? But there are also valleys. There are things that each one of us have experienced at some point in our lifespan. That includes relationship difficulties. For students, it could be doing poorly on an assignment. For some of us, it could be losing a loved one, especially during the COVID crisis that we're still kind of coping with. For some of us, it could be getting sick, losing out on sleep. For me, that's a very important valley because then I'm not functioning. And for some of us, it could be being lonely. And that is the framework I want us to have in mind as I go through what the different literature tells us about how to develop higher levels of resilience following those valleys in our lives. Everybody's with me? Okay. So this is the definition slide. I tried to make it a nice little graphic, so bouncing out of the concrete. So well-being is, according to the World Health Organization, a positive state experienced not just by individuals, but they also talk about societies. When we think about individuals, we're talking about things like having a good quality of life. So quality of life is something simple, like being able to take leisure time. It can be people who take staycations, people who go on trips abroad. But that importance of leisure and the impact of that on quality of life has been consistently seen in the literature. But also we're talking about things like the ability to contribute to the world with a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. Within the literature, that's called eudaimonic well-being. It comes from the philosophers that talked about the importance of having a quality of life whereby you're thriving, you're living a good level of functioning where you feel like if you know who you are and you have a life that you're proud of. That came in contrast to what the original philosophers were saying was hedonic well-being, where everyone is just having sex and living for pleasure. And this is thus what they mean when they say meaning and purpose. It's supposed to be seen as in contrast to that pleasure focus and more of a deeper quality of kind of understanding yourself and understanding the contributions you can make. Right, so that's what we're talking about when we say a meaning and purpose. And that is seen consistently as core to having high levels of well-being, is being resilient. Because we can't have, in order for us to continue on in life, seeing our life as having quality, seeing our life as having meaning and purpose, we need to figure out how to deal with when things don't go right. We need to figure out how to deal with when someone dies unexpectedly, when something unexpected happens that is a little minor. So one part of the research deals with something called daily hassles. So if in one day you've missed the bus, you've left something really important home, and then when you go to the grocery, your favorite treat that's supposed to make you feel better is no longer on the shelves, those things comparatively put together, cumulatively, can make you knock yourself off your well-being for a point in time. Right? So we're talking about not just the major events, but also the daily hassles that happen and how frequently those daily hassles happen to you. So now that we understand resilience and where it fits into that larger well-being literature, let's get a definition of resilience. At its core, it's talking about a capacity to bounce back from adversity, right? But the adversity, as I said before, can be something, a series of minor events, but it can also be something major. But what we're saying in terms of understanding what we mean by adversity is something that makes us stumble off of our regular mode of being. And it can be daily hassles as well as major events. Everybody's with me? Okay. So just a bit of research, but I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to explain everything that's on the slide, right? So ignore the graph for now, and let me explain the words. So whenever we collect a study, we mostly do it on students, and that's because they have to do it as part of their degree, and so we don't have to pay them. So this was a sample of around, I think, 65 students. So 50 females, and that's consistently going to be the case when we're dealing with students. Females tend to take part in research a lot more than males. So the understanding of male well-being is something that literature still struggles with. So 65 students, mostly female. The reason I'm using this study as well is because even though we had a large range of the typical age students, we still had people, at least some people, across the lifespan. Right? They're very small, but at least we can say to some degree we have some understanding of the relationship between resilience and well-being across the ages. Within this sample, we also had a range of ethnicities. So in most samples in the University of York, you will have 75% white British. That's just what York is. But for some reason, we were able to get a lot of Black Africans. So again, this shows us how well-being and resilience are related across different ethnicities. And so now let's go to the graph. What the graph is showing us is the light blue is those. Oh, this is touchscreen, so that's good for me to know. The light blue are those that are low in resilience, and the dark green are those that are high in resilience. So this first measure that they completed was a life orientation measure. That's just an optimistic thinking measure. And we have it in the next slide for you guys to test yourself on your optimistic thinking as well. And what it's showing is that those low in resilience had lower levels of optimistic thinking. And optimistic thinking is really key for high levels of well-being. So we're already seeing then that there's this intricate link between well-being and resilience across ages as well as across cultures. The second thing was satisfaction with life, and that's something simple as you're satisfied with your life at this point in time. Some of them are very detailed and they have around 5 or 6 questions. Some of them just show you a ladder and ask you to say what is your level of satisfaction compared to on this ladder. And what we're seeing here as well is those low in resilience had lower levels of life satisfaction, but those higher in resilience had higher levels of life satisfaction. So again, we're seeing this intricate link between what is well-being and what is resilience. Now the final one is the opposite trend that we're seeing, and that's because that's a psychological distress scale. So it's where we evaluated them on their levels of depression, their levels of anxiety, and their levels of stress. And what we're seeing is cumulatively, those low in resilience had much lower levels of psychological distress, but those high in resilience had much higher levels of psychological distress, and those high in resilience had much lower levels of psychological distress. So we're seeing that resilience seems to be that thing that helps us to have high levels of well-being. Is that everybody's with me? Okay. So now we're going to look at the resilience process. It's going to get a bit complicated, so stay with me, but then we're going to go into our training on skills, so we'll have a lot of fun. So there's 3 types of resilience that exist in literature. Because when someone engages or not engages, but they experience a negative event, they can decide how they're going to resiliently bounce back from that event. They can decide not to resiliently bounce back, and so that is what we call dysfunctional resilience. That is when we have things emerging like substance use disorders. That's when they're not functioning well. That event continues to have ramifications over the rest of their lifespan, and they cannot function. So that's dysfunctional resilience. The second one is survivor resilience, and that's when the person bounces back, yes, but they bounce back into their same level of functioning. So they lose the importance of that event for them developing higher levels of resilience, which is here called flourishing resilience. So yes, think about all those flowers for us that garden. I personally cannot garden. I have killed every single plant that has ever been gifted to me. But flourishing resilience is about that flower coming out of that concrete. You have learned from that experience. You have grown from that experience. You developed a high level of optimistic thinking or greater satisfaction with your life. So if we think about COVID-19 and the impact that has had on us, people report having a deeper appreciation of their relationships. People report having gone through some form of psychological growth. And that is where we're seeing that flourishing resilience happening. But what I also want us to think about, and again, it's a lot, but I'll go through it with you, is that resilience is not an easy process. It is one of the most debilitating processes that we will ever go through in our lives, that developing of higher levels of functioning. And that's because what happens to us, if we have flourished from a previous experience, we develop what is called a protective factor. And those are simple things like having high levels of self-esteem, high levels of optimistic thinking, right? And that develops in us. And so when we have another event happen to us, we are protected from falling apart. But then over time, we might have an event that we've never encountered before. So no one was prepared for COVID-19. I mean, when it first started, I'm like, oh, I get to work from home. And then months later, I'm like, oh, I don't want to work from home. Okay. So essentially, what's going to happen is that when we have an event that we're not prepared for, it's going to influence us in a negative way. This biopsychospiritual homeostasis is where we are at when we are functioning well. We're biologically functioning well, we're psychologically functioning well, and we're spiritually functioning well. But when that event happens to us, it makes us disrupt. And that should be seen something like falling completely apart. You're on your floor, you're crying, you're in your bed, you don't want to get up. And that is normal. That's a normal part of being overwhelmed by something that you have not experienced before. Right? So it's completely normal in your life process to have those hills and valleys, those points in times where you cannot function very well. Right? But then over time you're supposed to reintegrate, and that's when your skills are starting to develop. You're starting to, and the key thing that we're going to go through here today, the key thing that we all need to do in order to develop high levels of resilience is to find meaning in our experiences. Right? We take the time to process that experience. We take the time to either find meaning as significance, so see some form of benefit or some form of value in the experience, or we actually focus on just the lesson learned in that experience. So what has that experience told us about who we are, who we were, and who we were meant to be? And that's two types of meaning, but we'll go through those types of meaning as we go into our skills. And so based on what type of meaning we're able to find, we then decide which aspects of resilience we then experience. Everybody understand so far? Okay. So just a brief summary. So thus far you should be understanding that all responses, so the breaking apart that we all tend to be ashamed of, that is a normal part of the resilience process. You can immediately respond with survival resilience and be continuously just functioning at your pre-event level of functioning, but over time you can actually go into flourishing resilience, right? So it's not something that means that you stay and stick there, you can actually develop further. But also remember that it is typical for flourishing resilience to emerge over a long period of time. So we are still dealing with the after effects of COVID-19. There's some of us who still have that inner sense of not being able to predict what's going to happen and that level of anxiety that COVID-19 brought upon us. Right? So it's a long-term effect process that we're talking about here. And dips in your well-being are normal part of the resilience process. Everybody's ready to go into our skills training part of the session? Okay. So the first part of our slate is savoring your successes. So this links to the hedonic well-being that I spoke about before. I know a lot of us in the literature tend to focus on the eudaimonic and the having a meaning and purpose in life, but across all populations, being able to have a high level of life satisfaction, being able to experience positive emotions such as happiness are important for well-being. Right? According to, it has emerged across a lot of samples. So in the East Asian samples, things like hedonic well-being are a lot less important. So that might be something that's not as cross-culturally important. But in the UK, in samples such as Black British compared to White British, across all of those samples, having high levels of happiness and life satisfaction, etc., are important for our resilience. Right? The impact of such emotions emerges across the lifespan, so it's particularly important whether you're young or whether you're old, and across some cultures, but not all. So it's limited based on East Asians that are British versus East Asians that exist in China, for instance. Everyone's okay? Okay. So this is what I'm talking about when I told you guys that it's better to be, your resilience is better when you are older. So this is the curve that I was speaking about. So this is called the well-being paradox. Essentially what it's suggesting to us is that when they are kind of 18 to 21, that's when they feel like life has all the possibilities, etc. And then most people tend to be very satisfied with their lives. But then for some reason, as they go through the lifespan, their levels of life satisfaction tend to dip. So the levels of hedonic well-being, the levels of resilience in relation to those positive emotions, they tend to struggle with that across these aspects of their lifespan. But then as they get older, this tends to no longer be an issue. So we're seeing that in older individuals, resilience is higher because they have mastered those positive emotions. But what the research is actually showing is that they're not mastering having a lot of positive experiences. What they're able to do is they're able to savor the experiences that have happened to them and in their younger years. They're able to think back on those positive things that happened to them when they were 20 or 30 or 40 and have a deeper level of satisfaction for those experiences in their lives. Does that make sense? Okay.
Where
sorry.
information come from?
Oh, this is from a US sample. It's from somebody called Stone et al. If you do want the actual empirical reference, I can send it to you. Okay, perfect.
And what are covariates?
So covariates so they also assess things like anger. They assess things like, so this will be we'll have another one of these graphs later on in this presentation. They assess things like anger. They assess things like sadness. They also assess things like how often people smile, report smiling throughout their day. So when you're doing an analysis, you can do it without controlling for the impact of the other things. So what they're showing is that without controlling for the impact of the other things, so looking at just age alone, this is the trend. But when they start to control for other things such as gender and the other things that they measured, the trend is still present. So that suggests that it's still a genuine trend. Does that make sense? Okay. Whew. Okay. So this is how we understand where we are at in terms of our life satisfaction. These are the simple measures that we tend to use, and you can critically evaluate the extent to which you think these measures actually reflect your own life satisfaction. So I want you guys to consider things like, in most ways, my life is close to my ideal. The conditions of my life are excellent. I am satisfied with my life, and so far I have gotten the important things I want in life. If I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. So if you think about those types of items, I want you to think about where you would score. So if you would score really highly across them, that suggests that you have a high levels of life satisfaction. If you score in the middle, that suggests that you have actually average levels of life satisfaction. But if you score low, then I want you to pay attention to the skills that we're going to deal with as we go forward. Everybody's ready? Okay. Okay, so let's introduce you to the concept of savoring your successes. So when we think about life satisfaction, it's about enhancing those positive feelings. It's not about being able to have something that you're satisfied with at this point in time, but to see your life as a journey, as a trajectory, and so you're able to savor even the things that have happened in the past or the things that are going to come in the future. So if at this point in time you're standing up and you're like, oh, but I love pancakes and I'm going to have pancakes for brunch, that's something you could savor even though you're still in your bed in your PJs. Right, so that simple kind of, even though the doing it on a deeper level is what's related to resilience, the simple way of training your brain in that way to savor even when you're going through difficult periods is what has been linked to having those life satisfaction and being able to bounce back off of those negative experiences. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is about consciously relishing our positive feelings when we experience them as part of our work. So as part of your daily life from day to day, relishing the positive experiences that you're experiencing then, but also the things that you've experienced in the past. It's called savoring, which is a nice little term for it, I think. And its tendency is defined as a capacity to control your positive emotions. And it involves generating, intensifying, and prolonging the enjoyment of positive events by your own volition. So you are taking charge of how you experience your positive emotions. Does that make sense? Okay. So now I'm going to get a little bit more complicated with you, but I hope I won't lose you along the way. So this is related to the broaden and build theory, but it's a very old theory, but it's been kind of proven over and over again within the literature. So what this is showing us or telling us is that The reason why positive emotions helps us to have higher levels of resilience is because it has a multi-layered effect. Firstly, yes, we feel good. We love those endorphins. That's why I get up and exercise every morning, even though I really hate exercise. Those endorphins are things that help us to feel positive going forward throughout the day. But it's not just about the emotions, it's the way in which it changes the way in which you think on a consistent basis. Because what positive emotions do is that it helps you to think bigger, to think more creatively. It broadens the extent to which you consider solutions to problems as you are going through them. And that's the broadened part of the theory. So I have on this slide here that is broadens our thought action repertoires. And that's just a fancy way for saying that it enables us to consider a greater variety of novel alternatives when engaging and responding to anything that we're dealing with in the world. So what French, Riston, and Joyner actually quoted as saying is that it widens our human cognition and stimulates us to think more freely, creatively, and thoughtfully. So in simple terms, it helps us to have a wider perspective. So when we're dealing with an event that kind of is unprecedented, we are able to think creatively about how we can get through that event, what that event is teaching us, helping us to find significance in that event, and so ultimately getting that meaning that can help us to develop our higher levels of resilience. So it broadens it, but then we have the successes of actually putting it into place, and so over time it builds our coping capacity as well. So that's the second part of the theory, the building part of the theory. This wider perspective builds up our physical or intellectual, social, and psychological resources, because we're putting more resources into our bank of things that we know work for us when we're dealing with difficulties. Right, so in summary, it's called an upward spiral of well-being. Everybody's following me so far? Yeah. Okay. So this is your first activity. I want you to practice savoring something. So there are 3 aspects of savoring according to Bryant. And Bryant is the one who's kind of pushing forward this aspect of actually helping you develop resilience. So you can reminisce. And reminisce talks about mentally reflecting upon past positive experiences. Or you can choose to savor the current moments. If you're really enjoying this lecture, write about it a little bit, right? Or you can anticipate something that's coming in the future. So for me, it's when I'm going to go to actual summer, when I go visit my sister in the US in 3 weeks' time. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of work to finish in those 3 weeks, but we'll be fine. So take about 5 minutes and just write for a bit, or you can just think, if you don't want to write, about either one of them, and then we can move on to the next one of our skills. So here's where we're linking it to the meaning and purpose in life, right? And we talked about the eudaimonic well-being and how that is something that emerged in contrast to the hedonic focus of these philosophers, that part of that time of philosophy. And this is about living with a sense of meaning and purpose in terms of understanding what your values are and being able to live for those values, right? As simple as knowing that you believe that there's a just world. So if you have to make a decision, you have to make it in alignment with your values, that things are just, and so you want to make a fair decision for the person that you have to make that decision for. Right? Of course, as well as decisions for yourself. If you think something is unfair, you will then fight against that, because that is core to the values that is really important to you. Right? So core to living with a sense of meaning and purpose in life. Oh, there's always a gripe, there's always a typo, no matter how many times I look things over. Is living with the values focused to our behavior, what is generally called values-based living. And so it's seen as, our values should be seen as our guiding principles, right? So it is about knowing what your values are in life and taking time to figure that out. Because these guiding principles give meaning to our actions and behaviors, and therefore the successful pursuit or living in accordance with these values is really important for helping us to emerge from those negative experiences when they do come, right? So the impact of living with conflicting values as well within the literature has been shown to negatively impact your well-being. Because then when an event happens and you have to make sense or find meaning in that event, you have all these conflicting values that you have to align that event to. And so that means that you're less likely to emerge from that event in a positive way. Right, so the impact of values-based living has emerged across the lifespan as well as across cultures. And what I'm going to show you is some of the research I've done across cultures. So what we did in this study was digital storytelling, which is a long process. One of the things that I only do once a year because it's so very much involved, right? So what it entails is like you meet with students, you talk to them about the specific research question that you want them to answer, but then you train them in creating a digital story. What what they put up on those TikTok things. So that's what we mean by digital stories. And then you have them meet again to talk to you about why their digital story looked the way it looked. Right, so what we were looking at in this one were what are the things that students have struggled with while they were in university. And one of the things that emerged, and this is not the first time we've done it across multiple student populations, and I've also done it as a part of my research in a different population, and authenticity is something that consistently emerges. And authenticity relates to that values-based living. And what we see is that the being religious participants will focus on living in a values-based way in relation to God, so that's how they interpreted it. But the non-religious participants, so the white non-religious as well as the BAME non-religious, they still struggle with the values-based living, and they found a way to kind of make sense of what they were going through, alignment with their values. So let's look at the first quote for the BAME religious. Steering away from your light, the light that God puts in you, whether because you're scared or just because you don't know how to tap into that light, can also be detrimental to your path, to your journey. So they're talking about understanding what was going on with them according to that core value that they had about living a life in accordance with being a religious individual. Whereas the non-religious still had to find and interpret it according to the core values that they had. So the white non-religious is telling us, I also felt that I couldn't be my authentic self in the flat. Like little things I would get excited about, they would just say that it's silly. My previous flat base never understood why I like to volunteer for 6 hours every week instead of going to the club, and that's a challenge I've had to get used to. It was frustrating at times because I couldn't tell anyone where I was going due to facing judgment. But we're seeing that the person had to figure it out according to their values. Everybody's following me? Okay. So let's see how we can then learn to live according to our values. And according to the research, we have to engage in something called self-transcendence. That's just a fancy way of saying trying to connect with the different things that are around you, and in a way that does not kind of focus on you in a negative light. So it is about thinking about yourself and how you connect and relate to other people. And I want first, before we go into it in detail, to understand how it differs from introspection, difference from rumination, right? Because it entails a lot of introspection, a lot of internal reflection, but rumination is completely different, and it's something that a lot of people think about when we think about introspection. Rumination is negatively thinking over and over about a negative experience you've had or negative emotions that you are feeling, and that is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a kind of emotionless introspection, a kind of trying to understand and connect with others without that negative kind of putting yourself down focus, right? So it's not rumination. Instead, it relates to actively making sense of our experiences by integrating what we have learned from the setback or failure into our understanding of ourselves. And so that self-transcendence automatically enables us to find meaning in a better way, right? And generally, we engage in self-transcendence automatically if we are able to journal, right? So essentially develop a personal narrative. A lot of people are able to best develop this personal narrative by having a journal, but others are able to develop it just by having a sense of who they are and just continuously having that at the forefront of their understanding. The importance of having that personal narrative, of having that understanding of this is who I was, this is who I am, this is who I'm going to be, and I'm living according to that understanding at all points in my life. Core to that is making sure that when you then have to say to somebody, this is the story of me, it's a coherent story, it's a fluid story, and it's a flexible story, because we all grow and change as we go through this life. We can't be solidly focused on only one part of who we want to be. We have to allow that to change as we grow, right? And so one of the things I've done in understanding people's personal narratives is having a look at how they use ums and ahs. Something as simple as that when I did a linguistic analysis. Because the frequency of your ums, your ahs, your I don't really knows, that says that you have not actually had that coherent personal narrative. Right, so it is something that we are going to practice. And the reason that it is important is because that shows the extent to which we found meaning in our experiences. The extent to which we have a life story that has fully engaged and interpreted and incorporated all the experiences that we have had thus far. Everybody's following me so far? And so we develop a clear understanding of ourselves and are more easily able to see how the experience fits into the bigger picture of who we are, who we were and who we want to be in our lives. Everybody's okay going forward? Sorry, go ahead.
So do you mean like you have a coherent personal narrative before you hit like a dip, or that you hit a dip and then you create you reassess your personal narrative and create a new one?
Yes, so a bit of both. So we should all have a personal narrative. Like, I think I never had a personal narrative until I came up here, and I had to then understand who I was, because I was now in a different country with different values, and I had to figure out what my values were and how that would then determine how I interact with other people. So most people are only triggered to develop their personal narratives when they're going through an experience. If we don't go through an experience, we don't really need to know who we are, who we were, who we want to be. We just need to have goals and pursue those. Right? So it's triggered when you're going through something, but whatever triggers it, consistently having it and consistently letting that be open to change. Not too much change, because you do have your values that you want to stick to, but being flexible on certain aspects of it, that is what it's called. Have I answered your question? Okay. Everybody's okay with having a go at their personal narratives? So developing personal narratives helps us to find a specific type of meaning. So before we were talking about meaning as comprehensive, as meaning as significance, and this helps us to do the difficult one, which is the meaning as comprehensibility. Right? Here's where I want you to think about your entire life story as a big jigsaw puzzle. I love jigsaw puzzles, so I love this quote. And so each single experience that we're able to find meaning as comprehensibility becomes a small puzzle piece that will easily fit into that story of who we are. And when I say meaning as comprehensibility, it's something that's not as positive sometimes. It's about you learn something about yourself, something you never knew that might be negative, like maybe you're a bit narcissistic, or maybe you're a bit selfish, like me, a little bit vain. Or it could be something that you have kind of learned something about someone else. Right, so it's about those lessons learned, and it does not have to always be positive. It can be something negative, but it is something that you then have to integrate into your life story. Does that make sense? Okay, so this type of meaning helps us to develop our identities, but because we come to terms with not only our strengths, but our areas for improvement. And so it strengthens our strategic and reflective thinking and helps us to, again, become more resourceful. So now is your next activity. I think we are running out of time, so we won't spend 5 minutes on this one. But I want you to have a think for about 2 minutes about your personal narrative. And in the research, what helps people to develop their personal narratives are things like what is present here, and it's called a stream of consciousness. So when they say stream of consciousness, they don't want you to think about grammar or spelling. They just want to explore your psychological experience of something, and that means you just write freely for a couple minutes. Right, so it's things like exploring your own words, what the past week has been like for you, what are your thoughts and feelings about the various events in general. For instance, how do they relate to who you are, your childhood experiences, and who you hope to be in the future. The goal of this activity is to explore your psychological experience of your life over the past week, right, for around 5 minutes, and do not worry about grammar or spelling. Right, so we can do that for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then we move on to our final aspect. Okay, we have one more, which is to accept our experiences. Now, according to the literature, this is what is key. The key determinant in why older individuals have higher levels of life satisfaction, lower levels of negative emotions, higher levels of other positive emotions such as happiness. Essentially, this is what is the key thing that happens as we get older. In their younger years, they're focused on making an impact in life, making friendships that are focused solely on having them expand the impact of whatever they want to do. But as we get older, we make sense of those missed opportunities, and we adjust our goals because we're thinking death is coming soon. We need to live the rest of our lives in a way that actually makes sense to us and aligns more with our core values. And it's this acceptance that is actually one of the most important things for resilience and well-being across the lifespan. So this is from the same one as we did before. So this is from the same Stone et al. In the US sample. This one is from another US sample. I think it was Spartas et al. And I'll give you guys the references as well. So essentially what we're seeing here, this one is happiness. Whereas the first one from Stone et al. Was life satisfaction. This one is happiness, and we're seeing the same U curve. We're seeing here though as well that the levels of happiness for the younger cohorts is actually lower than those in the oldest cohort. Everybody seeing that? So the actual end of the slide is a lot higher than, sorry, am I in your way? The end of the end of the curve, so that point is higher than the start of the curve. So in terms of happiness, we're seeing that older individuals are even happier than 18-year-olds, right? This other one is negative emotions, and what it is showing is that across the lifespan, older people are experiencing significantly less negative emotions than younger individuals, right? And so we're seeing across all of those hedonic measures and across all of those measures that are related to resilience as well, being older is better. And so you can go back and tell your young grandkids that, like, boo-hoo, you're not me, right? So again, as I said before, the key thing that's emerging that's explaining this trend is called acceptance, right? And that's because with age, an individual accepts the life that they have lived and wants to make the most of the life that they still have left for them to live, right? So they accept missed goals and opportunities and become more selective when choosing life goals, forming relationships, and engaging in new experiences. So they choose more age-appropriate goals, focusing more on avoiding losses than obtaining gains. And it's the obtaining gains that young people are more focused on because they want to get more and more and more and make that impact in the world. They also emphasize more emotionally satisfying and meaningful pursuits in their relationships and in their experiences. So you see there's where you become a lot more selective in who you spend your time with. I'm selective at this point in time as well. I love my house and my bed. Very few people can get me out of that. But my mom always says I have an old age, and I'm like, yes, but the old age is related to higher levels of well-being. So that is the type of things that we're talking about here, right? Everybody's okay moving on? So this is another bit of research. This is not my research because I haven't actually looked at acceptance in any detail at this point in time. And so to present that would have been to lie to you. This is research by, I think I had it in these slides. Sorry. Okay, this research is by Shallcross et al. It was a US sample, 340 US participants, 21 to 73 years of age with an average of 41.3. So it's a slightly older sample. And what each of these triangles are telling us is that the relationship between age and the other variable is explained by levels of acceptance, right? So as they get older, they had lower levels of anger on a daily basis, and that was because they were more likely to have higher levels of acceptance. And the same thing here. So trait anger talks about the tendency to feel anger consistently, right? So it's not daily anger, it's anger over time. And so that trait anger again was explained, that reduced trait anger was explained by higher levels of acceptance. And if we go over here, the same thing with anxiety. So that anxiety, that consistently high levels of anxiety, that was lower as they got older, and that was explained by higher levels of acceptance. And then finally, we talk about physiological reactivity. So that's that levels of negative kind of physiological responses. That was lower as they got older, and that was explained by higher levels of acceptance. So we've seen that acceptance is consistently the key thing here, right? Okay. So how can we accept our experiences? How can we develop that level of acceptance in our lives? Again, self-transcendence is coming out here for us. But here we have to engage in self-transcendence on a much deeper level than what we were talking about in terms of that personal narrative. Here, I want to define self-transcendence for you to fully understand the full aspects or the full dimensions of that concept. Is the capacity to push past our personal boundaries and integrate perspectives, activities, and purposes beyond the self without negating the value of the self and the present context. Right? It's just about being able to connect on multiple levels with different things and different people. So it happens in many different dimensions. I'm going on to the next point. And so we do it inwardly through introspection, temporally by thinking about how our past and our future can impact our present, and that's a bit of what we did in the previous one with our personal narrative. Outwardly by being concerned with others' welfare, and transpersonally through connections with higher or greater dimensions. So the third one talks about our volunteering and how what we do in terms of charitable pursuits. And the fourth one talks about religiosity, right? So that's a good bit of my work is done in the religiosity area. What we're going to do is we're going to look a little bit more on the introspection part of it in this aspect. So the broader and more positive worldview that we develop as a relationship or as a result of self-transcendence leads us to a range of positive consequences. So we'll have positive affects and increased levels of life satisfaction. We'll have a greater purpose in life. But over and above everything, we'll have higher levels of resilience. And that is what we're trying to focus on today. Everybody's okay with moving on? So this is our final activity. See you later.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Our final activity is the one that we've avoided since we were young, journaling. Journaling is something that we all hate, right? Every Christmas I buy a new journal thinking that the nice pretty cover will make me write. It is still there, empty on the shelf, right? Essentially, it has been linked to self-transcendence in the literature. It allows us to connect so deeply with ourselves that it is one of these things that is highly encouraged across different ages. And one of the specific things that have emerged in the literature is gratitude journaling. So don't just journal, think about it in a grateful way. It can be something small that you're grateful for. So something like bumping into a friend on your way home, or something bigger. So something like living a happy and healthy life. And once you journal in a gratitude-focused manner, however so often every day, over time you will change your thinking mechanisms and be able to experience that level of acceptance greater and greater and greater degree the more you engage in gratitude journaling. So there are these instructions on the slide there. So at the end of each day, please review your day and write about experiences that you are grateful for and made you feel good. Please write as much detail as possible. The experiences might be small events, or might be big or small events or situations. They can be as simple as somebody telling you something nice, having a day go the way you wanted, or seeing someone that you had not seen for a long time, or the fact that you are healthy or that you are alive. You can write about many experiences, and this will help you develop the habits of keeping a gratitude journal and learning to reflect on your daily experiences. And over time, as I said before, this then means that you're able to have a higher levels of acceptance of whatever comes your way. Are you guys okay? Okay, I know a lot of you have to go on to something more. So this is our last slide. And I'm just going to talk you through this final aspect of our slay. So you know how to slap, but you'll leave knowing how to say. Right, so this is yearning for more. And this is about that optimistic thinking that is so very core to having high levels of resilience. Right, you can always improve, you can always become someone better in your life by focusing on finding meaning in those experiences and learning from those experiences about who you are, who you're meant to be, and how you relate to others. There is that reflection that essentially helps us to develop into better people over time and develop the resilience to deal with things like COVID, right? We couldn't get our groceries, we couldn't go to the supermarket, we couldn't run in the gym, but we found ways to deal with it by kind of thinking about things like, okay, at least this hasn't happened to me. So that's that downward comparison where we're saying that at least this hasn't happened to me compared to what happened to maybe your neighbor. Or we're saying, okay, I'll find an alternative, and so we get that creative thinking. But in order to be able to interpret in that way, we need to have a baseline level of thinking positively about our capacity to succeed now and in the future. And that's what optimistic thinking is about. One of the key ways in which you can develop optimistic thinking is to engage in imagery about your best possible self. So sit down and think about a life in which you've obtained all the goals that you want. And of course, through hard work, not through networking and getting things for free. But through hard work, you've obtained all the goals that you want in life. And engage in that imagery in a way that sets yourself realistic goals. And they can be personally, so developing a psychological skill. They can be professionally, so getting that dream job. Or they can be relationship-wise, so relational. And the more you engage in thinking about that best possible life, you'll over time develop the capacity to think optimistically about your capacity to succeed in your goals. And then you'll always be able to yearn for more. And that's the end of our session today. I hope I gave you guys enough time, to reach your next session. Thank you so much for listening.